What is the difference between a fault-based divorce and a no-fault divorce? That's our subject today. I'm John Henderson with HH Law, and we're going to talk about the difference in fault or an at-fault divorce and what does it mean to have a no-fault divorce. First, let's start with the fault-based divorce. So when somebody is found to be the reason for the breakup of a marriage, that person is going to be labeled at fault. And usually that means that they're going to be paying the lion's share of the cost associated with that divorce, that they are going to be the side that is going to be disadvantaged most. So how are you labeled at fault? We're going to talk about each of these more specifically, but first let's talk about what are the 4 fault grounds in South Carolina for divorce. We have adultery, desertion, which is leaving your spouse for a period of a year or greater, physical abuse, and habitual drunkenness. Let's talk about each of these a little bit more specifically and what it takes to prove. So in South Carolina, and again, these videos are designed to give you information. In South Carolina, we have very similar laws as they do in many, many other states. And so what that means is that this stuff applies for a lot of people in a lot of states, but not every state. So we would encourage you to consult a lawyer more specifically about the laws in your state. And it's an important thing to keep in mind because every state has a different set of laws. But as it relates to at-fault divorce, what that means is that with regard to adultery is that you have to prove that there was opportunity and inclination to commit the adultery. Okay, so what does that mean? I mean, clearly we're not in other people's bedrooms or in their cars or all over the place to be able to get actual first-hand information. Now, we have had plenty of cases where that was true. People have photos and things on their phone, and you can get this sort of information. But generally speaking, you need to be able to prove, in order to show adultery, that there was an opportunity that your spouse or you were alone with another person for some period of time where something could have happened, where a sexual relationship could have happened. But you also got to prove inclination, okay? So that you actually have the desire, the heart to go do that as well. And so you got to marry these two things together. Maybe that's a poor pun, but you got to put these two things together in order to be able to prove adultery. And you have to line up this evidence. You can't just suspect it. You can't just say, I think this is what is going on because my spouse is no longer wants to be physically intimate or whatever the circumstances are that leads you to that conclusion. You've got to be able to prove with the evidence. Now, the second one, a desertion fault ground, isn't really a fault ground at all because by the time you've passed that 1-year mark, somebody has disappeared. We actually now have on the books a no-fault divorce, which we will talk about in a moment. So desertion isn't one that I've actually ever even seen used before and certainly not used very often in the state of South Carolina. The third one is physical cruelty. And this is what you would think about as physical abuse. In most states, it's hard to be able to prove emotional abuse. So that is not a fault ground. That's a very gray area. Was it actually the reason for the breakup of the marriage or not? That's very difficult to prove. What we do have is physical abuse. And typically you're looking for things like, in terms of evidence, police reports, third-party witness statements, affidavits that would prove this sort of physical abuse. Obviously, photographs of injuries sustained during some sort of incident, okay? And that's the physical abuse, and that is a reason for the breakup of a marriage. And then the last one is habitual drunkenness. And this is not somebody who drinks on the weekends watching football with friends and you don't like it. This is something much more intrusive into the marriage. It has to be a very regular occurrence. You would typically think about something like somebody refuses to go to rehab to address an issue. Or increasing with frequency, you have substance abuse problems outside of alcohol. It could be hard drugs for sure, but it might be something that seems a little less obvious, like somebody is taking prescription medication, and that has become a significant issue, and they just can't kick it or won't kick it or won't try to get help or won't go to AA, won't do the things necessary You're not forced to live with somebody in perpetuity if they have significant substance abuse problems. And as with many things, a lot of times these things spill over with each other. Somebody has substance abuse problems, they're also abusive. Or somebody who is suffering from substance abuse problems, maybe they have an infidelity problem as well. So a lot of these things sort of go together, and you'll see more than one fault ground sometimes, or allegation at least, all clumped in together. Now, separate from that, those fault ground issues is a no-fault divorce. A no-fault divorce means that no one particular party is at fault for the breakup of the marriage. This typically occurs when there isn't any of those fault grounds. People say that they have irreconcilable differences. They're fighting a lot. They have financial problems. They have fallen out of love, whatever the issues are. And this happens a lot too, where you have emotional abuse. Maybe somebody's been trying forever to try to reconcile the marriage, and then that has just fallen on deaf ears, and then finally they've had enough and need to move on to something else. And so with this no-fault-based divorce, you have to be separated in South Carolina for a period of 1 year before you could actually achieve that divorce. Now, you can get separated on one day and then file for a divorce the next day and negotiate a settlement to that divorce somewhere in the months following. And then now you're just waiting for the 365 days to arrive for the final divorce decree. So that can take place as well. But the bottom line is that nobody's at fault for that marriage, and you have to be separated for a year in South Carolina for that to work. And from a big perspective, when there is an at-fault party involved, that the non-at-fault party is going to get the lion's share of the assets, probably, even though it's not supposed to deal with custody issues at all, often it does spill over to those custody issues as well. That if somebody has a substance abuse problem, for instance, they are not going to get sole custody of the children. It'll be the other spouse that gets custody of the children, for instance. And so really, when you're breaking this down, if somebody is labeled at fault, they're at a significant disadvantage when they're trying to negotiate a final settlement for divorce. When it's a no-fault divorce, you kind of start off by saying, hey, this is a 50-50. Let's split equity. Both sides have an equal shot at proving why it's in the children's best interest for the children to be with them. And then you're dealing with those custody issues basically from two sides that are equally fighting for those. And often that can get very contentious. There are various hearings to try to resolve those issues as well. But with the fault-based divorce, you really have a strike against you going into the divorce negotiation proceedings. So I hope that answers a lot of questions out there. The difference between a fault-based divorce and a no-fault divorce. I would encourage you to consult a lawyer in your local jurisdiction, your local area, your county, because a lot of this information does go throughout the country, but a lot of it is South Carolina state specific as well. If you are in the state of South Carolina, we are happy to talk to you about any of these issues. And if you are not, we are happy to provide this information so that you can have a context for helping make the best decisions you possibly can regarding you and your family. I'm John Henderson. Thanks for watching.